A friend from the past, vanished without a trace. Welcome to Phantom Mystery. I am your host, Edmund Cross. Tell me where you're listening from. Your comments make this journey unforgettable. Now, let's step into Miss Marple's mystery. On a mild September afternoon, St. Mary Mead gleamed as if it had been polished for visiting royalty. The annual harvest fete spread across the vicarage lawn in polite ribbons of bunting and tables, bearing jam jars in regimented rows like small glass soldiers. Children darted between stalls with paper rosettes pinned to cardigans. Grown-ups drifted, pausing for gossip as naturally as they would for breath. Somewhere behind the tea tent, a gramophone crooned an amiable waltz, and the honeybees, busy in the late sun, moved from dahlia to dahlia with the decorum of paying guests. Miss Jane Marple, small and neat in dove-grey, stood beside the cakes. Her hat's faded velvet bow had seen a dozen fate. She knew the jam entries by their owners and their temperaments. Mrs. Price's black currant was reliable, Mrs. Lively's ginger jam unpredictable but hopeful. She accepted a cup of tea from the vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, with thanks and a smile that crinkled her keen blue eyes. "Such a turnout," Mrs. Clement said, her cheeks pink with heat and pleasure. "We may run out of scones. Wouldn't that be something?" I said to Leonard we needed 4 dozen more, and he said, "Gracious Griselda, are you feeding the county?" "And look, it is always best to be prepared," Miss Marple murmured, though her attention had tilted very slightly toward the path leading from the gate. A lady was hesitating there. She was well dressed, too well for St. Mary Mead, her gloves too new, her hat too fashionable by exactly 2 seasons, which is to say she had bought this year what London wore last year, and wore it now as if it were cutting edge. It was careful, aspirational clothing, the kind used by women who believe they can hide where they've come from if they hold themselves at the correct angle to the light. The woman saw Miss Marple and stiffened. Then, like a small sudden thaw, she smiled, a flash of something younger breaking through. She came forward quickly, glancing about as though someone might be watching. "Miss Marple," she said, and the name was not so much spoken as released. Her voice trembled. Oh dear, do you remember me?" Miss Marple peered, a reminiscence forming like frost on glass and then wiped away. "My dear," she said gently, "forgive me. One meets so many people at fete. Clara." The woman supplied it in a rush. "Clara Pym, it was Pym then, Mrs. Clara Fenwick now." She swallowed. "You were kindness itself to me once. I was companion to Mrs. Weatherby and Much Haddam, years ago, and I did a foolish thing. You were visiting your cousin. You saw it all very clearly when no one else did." The frost cleared. Miss Marple had been younger then, and Clara Pym had indeed been a companion, nervous, eager, with a penciled-in future and an ink blot of a fiancé. There had been a missing brooch, a maid accused, and a small tragedy avoided. When someone noticed that companionable devotion may carry a light purse and heavy temptation, Miss Marple had noticed. It had required tact and no police. She had not seen Clara since. "How nice to see you again, Mrs. Fenwick," Miss Marple said in her mildest way. She took the woman's glove between finger and thumb for the briefest pressure, as if to steady her. The glove was suede, and her palm beneath was cold. Clara looked past Miss Marple, scanning faces with a darting anxiety that did not fit the fate at all. Could we talk somewhere quiet? Just for a moment. I know it's dreadful to intrude. I wouldn't if it weren't—" She broke off, teeth catching her lower lip. "Of course," Miss Marple said. "The lilac arbor by the side path is generally free of bustle. If we fetch another cup of tea—" She lifted hers in illustration. "It is as well to look harmlessly occupied." Clara's mouth twitched. "You always did think of everything." They moved, 2 elderly ladies, though only one of them truly elderly, toward the arbor. As they went, Miss Marple's eyes took in as effortlessly as breathing the soft tableau of village life. Mrs. Price pressing pamphlets upon reluctant men. Young Tommy Lively pocketing a toffee apple he had not paid for. the butcher's wife laughing too loudly at the new schoolmaster's joke. The new schoolmaster looking about to ensure his joke had been observed, and at a small distance, a man with a tan not earned in Essex, and a smile that belonged to someone who had been taught early that smiling opens doors. He hovered near the white elephant stall, not touching anything, glance sliding, then fixing briefly on Clara. "Excuse me, one moment," said Miss Hartnell, bristling up with a ledger of raffle books. But Miss Marple excused herself with a tiny flurry of apologies, and the ledger was reabsorbed into the bustle. In the arbour the shade held the day at bay. A breeze carried the scents of lavender and fallen apples. Clara clasped her handbag, rather like a child clutches a school satchel on the first day, knuckles white. "I have done with foolishness, Miss Marple," she said. "Truly. After that business with Mrs. Weatherby, I learned my lesson. I married. My husband was good to me before he died. I have kept respectable, you understand?" But her throat worked. "Respectability is a frail roof when the rain sets in. Rain?" Miss Marple inquired in a voice that would not frighten a robin. Her teacup hovered untasted. "A gentleman I met through friends," Clara said. "Mr. Adrian Lowther. He is charming. He says the right thing because he listens to the wrong things first. He knows what one fears. He was kind, so very kind, when I made the mistake of telling him about my past." She drew in a breath. "I have something of Mrs. Weatherby's yet. Not the brooch," she added quickly, colour rising. "No. A packet of letters. Silly nonsense from when she was a girl and should never have been saved, and Mr. Lowther knows they would embarrass someone important. He is convinced I mean to sell them. I do not, but he says others think I do. He says men who are not gentlemen will make certain I do not have the chance." Miss Marple's tea cooled, untouched. She felt within her the small, efficient turning of mental cogs that had never truly rusted. Her mind presented her with a parade of types: the charming man who learns, the frightened woman who confesses, the village which is already a net of gazes. "And the letters are where?" Clara's hand tightened on the handbag. "Safe." "Safe is a word with a large meaning," Miss Marple said, not unkindly. Her eyes slid through the green lattice and noted the tan man again, now examining the flower arrangement entries with an interest unlikely to be botanical. He wore a signet ring too bright and a tie too pale for good tailoring. "And you came to St. Mary Mead for—" "For you," Clara said simply, the relief in confession loosening her mouth. "I thought if anyone would know what to do—" She looked ashamed of the belief, as if belief itself were an indulgence. Before Miss Marple could reply, a shriek scattered from the far side of the lawn, the sort of sound that cuts a crowd into listening pieces. The music stuttered and stopped. The hum of talk sharpened into questions. "What on earth?" cried Mrs. Clement, already hurrying. People pulled toward the tea tent as iron filings to a magnet. Clara flinched. Her eyes went straight to the path, and Miss Marple saw there at the gate a figure nearly as incongruous as Clara's hat, a woman in sensible shoes and a county council lanyard, her face set with official alarm. But the shriek had come from nearer, the embroidery stall where a young girl stood with both hands to her mouth. On the table before her, a square of linen lay in a white frame. It had been embroidered in red thread, a shepherdess with her crook, and now there was an ugly smear darkening the lower border, fresh and precise as if drawn with a thick pen. It did not look like jam. Miss Marple did not hurry. Hurrying makes one miss things. She and Clara arrived as the vicar's wife cried for salts that no one ever produced when one truly needed them, and the young girl stammered, "I don't. Someone must have for she had seen the smear too, and smears are conveying things. "It's only a trick," said Mr. Petherick, who sold insurance and disliked sensation. "Red paint. Children—" "It has a smell," said the butcher's wife. "It does," Miss Marple agreed. "Iron and a touch of salt." Her voice was so mild that no one thought to be shocked at her certainty. She looked at the smear and then very gently at the edges of the frame. On the little lace mat beneath the frame, a single thread, Blue, very fine, had snagged and snapped. She pressed the mat with a finger. It shifted to reveal a small oval damp patch the size of a coin. Those two details slid quietly into that tidy cupboard in her mind, where she kept such things. They would be taken down again later, dusted and considered. "Where is Mrs. Bradley?" Mrs. Clement asked suddenly, thinking of the woman in the lanyard, who had been put in charge of tallying the competition entries. "She was just here. She went to the telephone in the vicarage," someone supplied. "She said she must ring." Well, she didn't say who. The tan man had drifted nearer, all concerned eyebrows and ready hands. He had the air of someone who likes to be helpful in the middle of a difficulty, preferably to the prettiest person present. He was not looking at the young girl, however. He was looking at Clara, measuring how far she stood from the gate. Clara's gloved hands were shaking. "Perhaps I ought to go," she whispered to Miss Marple. "I ought not to be in the way." "In my experience," Miss Marple said, "running away only makes one trip over something one wouldn't have tripped over otherwise. We will stand where we are and look as if we were thinking of seed cake." The vicar himself appeared at a jog, cassock flapping modestly. "All is well," he called, a man anxious to make it true by saying it. "A small accident, nothing more. Mrs. Bradley reports that someone has mislaid one of the silver cups for the flower arrangement prize." His eyes took in the red smear belatedly. "Good heavens! Mislaid," repeated Mrs. Price, with the special relish of those who have always believed mislaying is the first step to perdition. "That's what they'll call it." "Which cup?" Miss Marple asked the vicar in the tone one uses for weather. The vicar blinked, then brightened. "Oh, the little one, the Gossington cup, Lady Bantry's donation from years ago. We always keep it in the vicarage, and Mrs. Bradley always fetches it when, well, she says she fetched it and put it—" He waved vaguely at the tea tent. "Somewhere safe." Safe again, Miss Marple thought. Such a troublesome, elastic word. "Ladies and gentlemen," the tan man said suddenly, stepping forward with an authority that did not feel local. "If I may, there has been some mischief done. Perhaps we should let the vicar and his good lady settle this." He smiled. "No use in all of us crowding. Who are you?" Miss Hartnell demanded in the righteous voice of one who keeps the accounts and knows how names should be written in them. "Adrian Lowther," he said smoothly, and the nearby air drew a little sharper, as if someone had opened a window in winter. He gave a small bow. "A friend of Mrs. Fenwick." There was that bell-like silence that sometimes follows a name, if the right ears know it and the wrong ears immediately want to. Clara took a step back. Miss Marple might have seemed to sigh. She adjusted the handle of her handbag and addressed no one in particular. Such a tiresome business at a fete. So often such things are. One never remembers one's raffle number afterward. And the seed cake is invariably a touch dry, but her eyes, amiable as ever, moved from the red smear to Clara's handbag, to Mr. Lowther's ring, to the missing cup one could hide in a thickly lined handbag or behind a tea-urn, to the blue thread, to the damp oval on the lace. She tucked each observation away as if placing a folded handkerchief into a drawer. "Miss Marple," Clara whispered, and her voice was no longer trembling but thinned by dread. "I think I have done quite wrong by coming." "On the contrary," said Miss Marple gently, "the way one speaks to a skittish cat that has ventured indoors out of the rain. You have done very right indeed. For if there is to be mischief, and there is always mischief when people are frightened, it is best to have it where it can be seen." Somewhere beyond the tea-tent, in the small vestibule by the vicarage telephone, Mrs. Bradley was not answering when called. The gramophone restarted gamely, hiccuped and went on playing. The fete resumed in a ragged fashion, as crowds do when they cannot decide if they have had a shock or a story. The vicar found salts. The girl laughed at nothing. Miss Hartnell reordered her raffle books, as if straight columns could keep chaos at bay, and in the dapple of the lilac arbor, Miss Marple stirred her tea with a small, exact motion, then set it down without tasting it. The spoon rang once against the cup and was still. The Fates' music tried valiantly to iron the afternoon flat, yet a crease remained. People resumed their circuits with the careful jauntiness of sleepwalkers. Miss Marple, who had seen many such afternoons re-sown, lingered in the lilac arbor until the talk settled into threads she could separate. "You will not leave?" Clara asked low, as if the hedges might carry tales. "Not if I can help it," said Miss Marple. "It is wisest now to be extremely ordinary, and to notice who cannot contrive it." Adrian Lowther had promoted himself into usefulness, producing a silver pencil, counselling lists, and speaking at the confidential pitch where rumour germinates. He never looked toward the vicarage door, which was a way of noticing it. "It would be useful," Miss Marple said in a voice meant for roses, "to see where Mrs. Bradley believes she mislaid the cup." They moved as ladies admiring dahlias, slowly with pauses that meant nothing. At the White Elephant stall, Miss Marple noticed a faint dust print where something round had lately sat, the sort of absence that keeps its shape. She touched nothing. Not touching is instructive. The vicarage corridor held Sunday coolness. The vestibule telephone rested primly. The receiver sat down with the care of someone who had failed to complete a call. A basket of lost property lounged below, 2 odd gloves and a child's scarf. On the polished table, a smear of almond paste confessed to a hurried sweet tooth. One door stood ajar, the morning room where prizes waited. The larger cups glowed dutifully. Beside them, on a folded tea towel, a damp ring like a small crown. The weave had trapped a fine blue fibre, like thread from a lady's cardigan. "Nothing dries evenly," Miss Marple murmured. "Except lies. Those dry at once." Clara clutched her handbag. "You think the missing cup was there?" "It rested," Miss Marple said, "and was moved in haste. When people mean to return for a thing, they rarely put it where it belongs." A sideboard cupboard gaped. She knelt and peered in. Dust filmed the shelf, patterned by the oval absence of something removed. Against the inner lip a speck of metal polish glimmered. "Ah!" A scuff sounded above, then stilled itself. Presently Mrs. Bradley descended the back stairs briskly, cheeks high, pins awry, the very picture of someone greatly occupied. She started at finding them there and recovered at once. "I may have frightened myself," she said. "Counting, then miscounting." One does, Miss Marple agreed. "It will come to light." Mrs. Bradley's glance touched Clara, slid away, and returned to the latch as if to ensure it was shut. "If you need tickets or tea or directions," she began, and bustled past when reassured. They let the house fold itself behind them and stepped into the hum once more, which had obligingly mended itself for public comfort. On the lawn, the gramophone resumed as though it had never hiccuped. The red smear lay under a napkin like an awkward thought in a drawer. Adrian Lowther intercepted them with handsome contrition. "Mrs. Fenwick, what an unexpected pleasure." Clara managed steadiness. Miss Marple beamed. "Do admire the vicar's roses, Mr. Lowther. The yellow love that old brick which keeps last year's sun." He approved and turned helpful again. "An inventory might soothe matters. Anyone near the prizes after Mrs. Bradley set them out." "How sensible," Miss Marple said, in a tone that blessed and dismissed at once. She offered him a plate he did not want. Men who live by charm dislike refusing anything in public. He bore it away with spotless shoes that admitted no grass. "Where are the letters?" Miss Marple asked softly. "At the Crown," Clara said. "Locked. The key is sewn into my glove." She showed the small firmness at her wrist. "One should never consign safety to a single stitch," Miss Marple said. "And one should never suppose a gentleman cannot obtain a key by being perfectly civil." Clara's mouth tightened. "You think he has another?" "He will try," Miss Marple said. A pleasant ripple crossed the green. Lady Bantry arrived in pearls and perfume, and cheerful Miss Rule to present the prizes. Under that agreeable stir, Miss Marple took Clara's arm and drifted toward the side path at a pace too moderate to be remarked. The path ran behind the tea tent along the warm wall. In the trampled ribbon of grass, a darker scuff showed where a heel had pivoted. "'Twan brick, A chalky graze suggested metal had kissed it. A mother-of-pearl button glimmered in dust, plain and recent. People who hide things, Miss Marple observed, often shed something of their own while doing it. Footsteps approached. They became attentive to deadheading. Mrs. Bradley bustled by, officious again, colour high, hairpins sternly corrected. "All in order," she announced to the air, only to find that silly cup. "No one is very clever when being naughty," Miss Marple said amiably, and Mrs. Bradley, uncertain whether to take offence, hurried on. "After we admire Lady Bantry's hat," Miss Marple said, "we shall walk to the Crown by the lane. It would be prudent to ensure no one has been over-civil at your keyhole." Clara's breath caught. "If he tries, we should allow him an opportunity to try where we can see," Miss Marple said. "Secrets are best observed in daylight." They endured roses and a morsel of affectionate scandal, then set out. The lane smelt of late apples and warm dust. Somewhere a bicycle bell chimed. A rook scolded from elm to elm. Halfway along, a motor car turned onto the green from the far end and idled as if undecided. The driver, finding nothing to admire in the view, nevertheless admired it very visibly. The Crown offered polished oak and discreet boredom. The landlord's wife greeted Miss Marple with respect, and Clara with the neutrality reserved for strangers, who settled promptly. "Mrs. Fenwick's room?" Miss Marple asked. "We thought to fetch a cardigan. Evenings are treacherous." The woman went herself, as innkeepers do when talk threatens to become value. On the stair the air held beeswax and old soap. In the room Clara unpicked 3 quick stitches at her glove seam, produced the tiny key, and opened her travelling trunk. Inside lay a tired calf writing case. "Before you open it," Miss Marple said, "note the dust." There was almost none. Clara lifted the flap. Packets tied with ribbon had been retied by someone impatient with bows. "They've been touched," she whispered. "But they're all here." "Not all," Miss Marple said, touching the lining where a new crease made a small mouth. "Someone looked beneath and wanted proof, not possession." A floorboard below spoke. Another answered with the careful weight of a boot, too clean for a village green. Miss Marple drew the curtain a finger's breadth. The motor car waited. Adrian Lowther stood beside it, not looking at the inn at all, which is a way of looking. "He is patient," she said. "Patience is what charm uses when unobserved. What shall we do?" "We shall tidy. Lock the case and return it to the trunk. Then move the letters somewhere that offends his sense of proportion." "Where?" "The tea-room," Miss Marple said placidly. "Behind the sugar canister. Thieves dislike domesticity." They left as if a cardigan had failed to suit, and reached the green just as Lady Bantry cleared her throat for the prizes. Lady Bantry called winners and placed cups into hands with cheerful authority. Miss Marple and Clara slipped toward the tea tent with the innocent purpose of sugar. Steam and polish scented the canvas. A glass canister stood open, a paper bag tucked within for those who like to carry sweetness away. Behind stacked cups lurked an older brown tin with a grudging lid. Clara stood very still. Stillness, Miss Marple knew, is fear's first habit. Outside, Lady Bantry praised the schoolmaster's dahlias. "Now," Miss Marple murmured, "make a small mistake someone will hurry to correct. Ask for brown sugar. Say pale tea goes to your head. Do not insist. Look resigned." Clara obeyed. The tidy girl at the urn apologized and glanced toward the brown tin, the way hands remember what lists forget. "We might have a little," she said, rummaging. Miss Marple set down her spoon with a faint ring, the sort of sound that invites ears trained to opportunity. Adrian Lowther's voice arrived before he did, polished as a shoe. "Mrs. Fenwick, hiding among kettles," Roses judged. "Only tea remains." He appeared holding Miss Marple's surrendered plate of cake like a badge of helpfulness. Mr. Petherick drifted after him, gathered by curiosity's tax, and the new schoolmaster. Not yet warned that where talk collects, reputations thin, Mrs. Bradley followed. Brisk blue cardigan, very clean about the hands, a pulled thread fluttering at her cuff. "All's in train," she told the volunteers. "If anyone sees that silly little silver cup, sing out before I am pilloried." The tent laughed. Miss Marple's friendly eyes filed the thread beside the red smear on embroidery and the damp ring she had noticed earlier. The tent filled with temporary thirsts. "Observe," Miss Marple said without moving her lips. Adrian put down the plate, asked for napkins he did not need, and steadied a sleeve against the sugar lid. A moment later the lid lay properly closed. The paper bag inside showed a new crease. "So many hands," Clara whispered. "Every hand tells its story," Miss Marple replied. Tommy Liley, rosetted and sticky, ducked for lemonade, clipped a trestle leg and sent plates sliding. For 3 seconds every hand belonged to plates or to child. When the stacks were tamed, the canister sat deeper and the little bag looked more crumpled. "I see it," Clara said. "I see a rehearsal," Miss Marple said. "First attempts test the piece and the audience both. Fetch the jelly mold prize," someone called. Mrs. Bradley, grateful for a command not involving silver, hurried out. Adrian drifted after her with the kind of slowness that suggests duty. Mr. Petherick, abandoned, folded his arms. "Now," Miss Marple said, "we shall spoil a man's appetite." She beckoned the tidy girl. "Fetch the brown tin from Whitson." The girl produced the squat tin. Its lid yielded only when coaxed. Miss Marple prized it, sniffed, and declared herself satisfied. While the girl smiled, Miss Marple slipped the tied letters from her sleeve and let them sink into the tin among the sugar. "Oh dear. My handkerchief," she added, and busied herself with an empty fold. They emerged into sunlight. Lady Bantry waved from the dais. "Miss Marple, you always know the jam results before I do, and make fewer enemies," Miss Marple returned. Adrian stood by the White Elephant stall with the Crown's landlord. His back advertised composure. The landlord's wife was absent. Miss Marple pictured an upstairs room with a trunk locked and a case empty of anything worth a burglar's stitch. The prickle at her nape said the pattern was hardening. "Walk," she said to Clara, and they made a brief arc past the rose tent. For one breath the counter lay unattended. Miss Marple opened her handkerchief. 3 glittering grains not present a minute earlier winked in its fold. "Yes," she murmured, "he rehearsed. He will perform when audience and stage agree." They did not wait long. Mrs. Bradley returned first. Adrian followed with exactly the casualness of a man who has chosen his moment. "Might there be a scrap of seed cake?" he asked. While the slice was cut, he leaned back 2 inches and arranged himself as the man who assists. His fingers touched the old tin, found the lid secure, then drifted to the glass canister, and under a movement that looked like steadiness, lifted something small and folded into his palm. Miss Marple did nothing. One must sometimes let the wrong person be perfectly satisfied. She accepted a slice she would not eat, and smiled at Adrian like an indulgent aunt. He lifted his plate, bowed, and withdrew with shoulders buoyed by acquisition. "We shall have our tea," Miss Marple said, "and then admire the landlord's motor car." They did. The saloon idled in the lane. One rear door had not quite caught. Men expecting sudden departures leave latches shy. On the running board a sugar grain glinted. In the ashtray lay grey confetti from torn ribbon ends. "He unwraps his sweets quickly," Miss Marple observed. "But when the sweet is wrong he keeps the paper, so he has taken something that is not letters?" Clara asked. "He has taken precisely what was prepared for him," Miss Marple said. The bag on top held parish circulars tied with the same blue ribbon. From the vicarage came a thud that was not furniture and not a hymn book. Mrs. Clement's voice called for Leonard. People turned as fields turn under wind. Miss Marple did not hurry, and so arrived with those who ran. In the vestibule, Mrs. Bradley sat on the polished floor with her back to the wall, eyes wide with astonishment. The small Gossington cup lay 2 feet away, nicked, damp-rimmed, suddenly virtuous. "I tripped," Mrs. Bradley said. "Silly. I found the cup behind the aspidistra. I came to present it, and down I went." The vicar hovered. We heard a sound. "The cup," she said. "And my dignity." Her gaze touched the telephone, flinched, returned. Miss Marple looked at the floorboards. A wet coin marked where the cup had sat. Beside it, a dust circle, older and faint, suggested an earlier rest. The aspidistra's leaf was bruised. "Dear me," Miss Marple murmured. "Lost and found, the oldest game." Adrian arrived with the last ripple of the crowd. "What awful luck," he said. His attention flicked toward the hall table where letters often lay. He caged it and offered Mrs. Bradley a hand. She rose, crisp as paper. It was too much honest clumsiness for one afternoon. When people begin to stumble, they often collide with what they meant most to avoid. "Tea for shock," Miss Marple suggested. In the hum that followed, she stood by the telephone as if merely keeping out of the way and brushed the ebonized cradle. The receiver was warm, but not recently. On the wood's edge, a faint smear of almond paste confessed to hurrying lips. "We will return to the tea tent," she told Clara. "And then," she added, as if discussing seed catalogues, "we shall allow Mr. Lowther to discover that some letters are very dull indeed, while others, when read, have a small unkind trick. They read the reader back, for all to see." Back in the tea tent, Miss Marple measured the sugar into her cup with that sensible thrift which looks like inattention. The brown tin sat with a faint dignity, sullen-lidded as if resenting usefulness. Clara watched it, as one watches a sleeping child one is certain will waken crying. "Do not stare," Miss Marple murmured. "Suspicion enters where eyes fix." She stirred, then set the spoon aside and contrived to dab her glove with a touch of syrup, murmuring over the inconvenience while a volunteer fluttered to assist. In the small flurry, the tin's position altered by less than an inch, enough that a returning hand could not replace it without thought. Outside, Lady Bantry's voice floated in pleased flourishes. Prizes clinked. Adrian appeared at the tent's edge with the landlord in mild tow, accepted a cup, and produced a warningly empty purse in apology for lacking small change. He smiled at the girl with the urn. The girl blushed and made change from an imaginary drawer. Miss Marple quite admired it. Charm handled professionally always has a cashier. "What was it you said of letters reading their reader?" Clara asked, quietly eager and afraid of her own eagerness. "Only that people tell on themselves," Miss Marple said. "There were names in those letters, places too. One cannot help looking up when one's own corner of the world is mentioned. Her guilty conscience, my dear, is the most attentive listener in any parish." She waited until Adrian, impatient of idleness, offered to carry a tray to the dais. He moved away with capable stealth. "Now we shall try an experiment that does not look like one." Miss Marple beckoned the new schoolmaster, who came obediently, eager to be useful where admiration might be earned. "Mr. Nash, is it? Such a comfort to see education on two legs. I have been trying to recall, was it Mr. Weatherby who kept pigs at Beechwood Farm before the war, or Mr. Mellor?" "Mrs. Clement says Weatherby." Mr. Nash looked alarmed, as new schoolmasters do when history slides off the blackboard into living voices. Mr. Petherick, remembering insurances filed by both, interposed, "Mellor, surely." "Weatherby had orchards." "Apples," said Miss Marple, gentle as a needle, "and a very pretty loft with a blue-painted ladder. I have not thought of it for years." The word blue pleasantly dropped, touched the air as a pebble touches shallow water. Mrs. Bradley, passing with a list and a brisk set to her shoulders, checked the fraction of a pace one uses to step over a memory. Her gaze flicked to Miss Marple's gloves, to the brown tin, to Clara's steady face. She moved on with newly careful feet. Adrian at the dais now laughed at something Lady Bantry said, but his laughter came a hair too late, the rhythm of a man listening for a different sound. He looked across the green as if he might see a blue ladder, if only he faced the right direction. "That will do for a beginning," Miss Marple said. "I have remembered a second thing." She let it float later, near the embroidery stool where the vicar's wife collected up the shameful linen with the kindness of a woman who has picked up worse. "There was a riddle on the wall of that loft. Do you recall, Griselda? What sweet is bitter in the mouth and kind on the tongue? My cousin vowed it was almond. I thought otherwise. "You and your riddles," Mrs. Clement laughed. But she looked at the telephone vestibule as if a taste lingered, and several persons who had not been within a mile of Beechwood Farm considered almonds gravely. Adrian, returning from the dais, failed to disguise interest. "What an odd parish you have," he said, "full of nursery puzzles." "Oh, not only nursery," Miss Marple returned with sweet vagueness. "Some are for girls grown suddenly older." He excused himself with a glance that nicked Clara and slipped away toward the lane, where the motor car waited like a lenient accomplice. Miss Marple and Clara drifted after in a manner to be explained by draughts of air and the necessity of fresh kettles. They came to the saloon as Adrian opened the rear door with the right carelessness and set down a newspaper parcel. He lifted it again almost at once and frowned at the torn ribbon ends within. "He is improving," Miss Marple observed, and nodded toward the ashtray with its small grey testimonies, "and becoming impatient." "Do we leave the letters in the tin?" Clara asked. "We leave them where they contradict expectations," Miss Marple said. "People who have decided where a thing is are blind to where it sits." A child's shriek cut the air. Not terror, but discovery won at the cost of a stained frock. Tommy Liley ran, waving his toffee apple triumphantly and gulping explanations about a man who had offered him a penny for a message and then nothing when Tommy asked for the penny first. "Did he say for whom?" Miss Marple asked, and Tommy, swollen with importance, recited, "For the lady in the blue cardigan at the tent, and I was to say the cupboard's bare." The message, borrowed shamelessly from nursery rhyme, made Miss Marple's mouth flatten. Adrian strolled back onto the green, smooth as a pond. Mrs. Bradley marched from the vicarage side, colour up again, hands scrubbed pinker than before. Her eyes met Adrian's. Something small, practised, and unkind flickered. Then she altered her direction toward the tea tent. "The cupboard," Clara whispered. "In the morning room?" "Or his patience," Miss Marple said. "Or her conscience." She took Tommy by the shoulder. "Well done for not delivering words without wages, dear. Find your mother and tell her you were as good as gold." She and Clara went the long way round, past the white elephant stall where the dust print of a round absence still declared vacancy. Miss Hartnell, irritated by other people's mysteries, reordered her ledger and sniffed. In the tea tent, Mrs. Bradley had contrived to be alone with 2 kettles and the brown tin. Miss Marple spoke from the entrance in the voice of a woman noticing crockery. "Ah, there's the old sugar tin. My aunt always said brown sugar makes better cakes for people one dislikes." The remark drew Mrs. Bradley's eyes up with a small jerk. She removed her hand from the lid as if the metal might scald. "Do you never sit, Miss Marple?" she demanded, crisp as a fresh letter. "I have been dashing like a beetle." "Sitting stiffens one," Miss Marple said, and moved nearer as if her looking were all for labels. On the tablecloth, a faint glaze marked where a damp cup had lately rested. In the glaze 3 grains glittered. The tin had a new clean arc along its dusty rim, a crescent made by a hesitating palm. "I have found your silly cup," Mrs. Bradley went on, "behind the aspidistra. It is safe with Lady Bantry now." "So comforting," Miss Marple said mildly. "One likes things to be where they seem." She did not look at the pulled thread on Mrs. Bradley's cuff, though she registered its flutter like a moth that cannot find the window. "I must see to the list," Mrs. Bradley said, and went with marching heels. "Why the message if she has already found the cup?" Clara asked. "People send messages to feel powerful," Miss Marple said. "Mostly they send them after the fact." She lifted the tin's lid, looked without touching, and closed it again. The ribbons within lay content in their sugar coverlet. "He will come again," she added. "Or she will. The trick is to make them meet in the doorway." The gramophone, having worked valiantly, sputtered to a halt and, as if offended by its own effort, expired. A ripple of relief went through the crowd. Lady Bantry declared the fete nearly done and bid all to the raffle. The raffle is the village's confessional. Purse strings loosen, tongues follow. Miss Marple secured 2 tickets with the air of one choosing not to be greedy of Providence, and let Clara draw them from her hand with nervous care. The first prize, by happy accident or Miss Marple's clear blue eye upon the vicar's wife, was a hamper to be collected from the tea tent after drawing. "Useful," Miss Marple remarked. "A hamper's insides make all sorts of things possible." They stood by as numbers were called, and when Mrs. Clement announced Miss Marple's hamper with genuine surprise, Adrian clapped with impeccable goodwill. He waited, considerate as a valet, as Miss Marple and Clara went to fetch it. Inside the tent, resting by the leg of the table where the tin stood, the wicker hamper presented its honest mouth. Miss Marple looked at the lid's hinges and the clasp, then at the tin, then at the space between. "There should be a second slice of luck," she murmured, and opened the hamper. On top lay a folded square of linen, the very embroidery cloth with the red smear, its shepherdess gazing outward with implacable innocence. Someone had thought to hide an offence under charity. Clara recoiled. It looks like someone who requires red drama for courage," Miss Marple said, "and like someone too thrifty to sacrifice jam when there is more convincing material at hand." She sniffed the stain. "Pig's blood will do very well when a butcher is friendly and a cup is near." She laid the linen gently back and placed the brown tin, still shut, into the hamper with other items. "We will carry this home carefully," she said. "If the cupboard is bare here, we shall see what fills when the cupboard moves." They bore the hamper into the sun. Adrian, seeing, expressed relief at being spared the burden, and spoke of inclines and wrists. Mrs. Bradley, also seeing, blinked as if a rabbit had bolted where she had laid a snare. "How lucky you are, Miss Marple," she said. "Luck," Miss Marple replied, "so often follows a list." Adrian stepped close enough that his cuff brushed the hamper. A faint sugar sparkle leapt from wicker to wool and held there, glimmering like frost upon a hedgerow. Miss Marple admired it, and then admired the vicar's dog, who had chosen this exact moment to flop in the lane, thereby delaying departure. Good dogs often know when to lie down. They had almost gained the gate when commotion unknotted the calm again. A boy tumbled breathless from the vicarage side. "Mrs. Bradley," he shouted. "She's fainted in the morning room." People turned like sunflowers. Mrs. Bradley herself was not with them. She had vanished in the last minute, as efficient people do when they are certain others will remember them where they were. Miss Marple set the hamper on the wall and touched Clara's arm. "Now," she said softly, "is when cupboards show what they meant to hide." The cry in the corridor frayed and then flattened as people discovered there was nothing useful to do except look concerned. Miss Marple did not hurry. She arrived when noise had finished its work, and sense might begin. The morning room wore the gloss of attention. Mrs. Bradley lay along the small sofa with the care of a woman performing recovery. Her eyes were shut the way lids are shut when listening to what others will say. Mrs. Clement waved salts. The vicar offered a theological murmur and decided against it. "Dear me," Miss Marple said mildly, "fainting is quite reliable about the ankles. If one keeps lying down, they grow obstinate for hours. It is extraordinary how many people sit up when told where discomfort intends to settle." Mrs. Bradley did so at once, then looked embarrassed and brave. "Heat," she said. "So silly of me." "Of course," Miss Marple returned. "You were quite right to sit. Did you find the cup in here?" "Behind the aspidistra," said Mrs. Bradley quickly, and the speed of the answer was a little like a schoolgirl reciting. Miss Marple let her gaze drift. Never pounce, drifting sees more. The tea towel under the restored silver held a cloudy damp where polish had been scolded into speed, and in the weave 2 fine blue fibres clung, almost the colour of a thrush's egg. On the window sash, a thumb had rubbed metal clean. Below, along the warm brick, a faint graze admitted that something hard had kissed the wall. People do not graze brick unless carrying what does not suit a pocket. "I am quite restored," Mrs. Bradley announced. "There is an inventory to complete. Lady Bantry must not be kept." "Inventories prevent quarrels," Miss Marple said. "Cupboards, too, when they are not declared bare at inconvenient moments." Mrs. Bradley coloured and excused herself with a regained briskness. The crowd unknotted. Relief is contagious and faith in practical women more so. Miss Marple said nothing further. She had found what she wanted, little things that wait patiently to be noticed. In the lane, the vicar's dog guarded Miss Marple's hamper with the air of a saint doing a small favour. Clara stood beside it, composed by effort. "No one touched?" Miss Marple asked. "Only looked," Clara whispered. "I thought he would come." "He will," Miss Marple said. "Patience is simply the polite word for pressure." She flicked the clasp with a nail. It gave the infinitesimal catch of a fastening, tried and left dignified. "Yes, Adrian Lowther arrived at once, which is to say the moment felt chosen for him. You must allow me," he said, and reached for the handle. Miss Marple contrived to change hands so that his courtesy took hold of nothing at all. He laughed, as handsome men do when their timing goes crooked. His cuff turned and caught the sun. 3-minute sugar sparkles glinted where they had no business. "What a relief that the little cup returned to grace," he observed. "One hears missing and thinks of wickedness." "Wickedness seldom comes to fates," Miss Marple said. "They are designed to annoy vice into going elsewhere." She smiled. "I'm going home. My kettle expects me." "Then I may escort you," Adrian offered. "Everyone is safer in company." "A policeman would be better," Miss Marple answered pleasantly. "But I shouldn't like to alarm anyone." He bowed and stepped away with delightful comprehension, which is a useful way of following. They went by the lane where late bees made a business of the ivy. The village behind them resumed its self-respect. The cottage gate gave its small disapproving click. Inside nothing appeared curious, because everything had looked the same yesterday and intended to look the same tomorrow. That is the chief excellence of old furniture. It does not act. "Set the hamper there, my dear," Miss Marple said, "and give the world a minute to think we have stopped thinking about it." Clara lifted out the brown tin as though it might bite. Sugar dusted the cloth like a blessing and a warning. Miss Marple fetched an old pair of cotton gloves and opened the lid the width of a spoon. The tied packet lay prim and sweetened, exactly as she had left it. "He or she will not come for what sits in the middle of the table," she said softly. "People prefer objects that have been placed just out of reach. Desire enjoys a little height." She set the tin back and moved the hamper to the low ottoman by the hearth, laying a cushion across the top as any tidy woman might. The gate gave its voice again, very modest. "Two," said Miss Marple, not looking. "Two? Birds seldom feed alone when crumbs appear." She called out that she was at home. Adrian's tone arrived first. Cheerful and apologetic, he had only wished to ensure they were quite safe. Mrs. Bradley's followed briskly. She had come to say she was perfectly herself, and then had met a Mr. Lowther, and thought to make a second check. "How good of you both," Miss Marple said, and set 3 cups. Adrian praised the roses he could not name. Mrs. Bradley apologized for fainting, with a fluency that suggested practice. Miss Marple placed the teapot toward Mrs. Bradley, the plate of seed cake toward Adrian, and as if thoughtlessly the sugar, so that a standing man might reach it without moving his feet. She put the brown tin on the table, and the cushion-covered hamper not quite in sight. "I am very old-fashioned," she said, pouring. "I like to have important conversations over tea. It saves people spilling things. Important." Adrian allowed his eyebrows the courtesy of surprise. Surely the worst is over. A cup mislaid, a moment of excitement, and now tranquility. "The worst," Miss Marple said, "arrives when people are tired of pretending to be tranquil." She looked at him kindly. "When you opened a little paper packet in your motor car you were tired, I think. It is fatiguing to find parish circulars where one expected intimacy. You tore the ribbon. Ashes of it are in your ashtray." Adrian's smile did not alter. It simply took more effort to remain where it was. "And you," Miss Marple said to Mrs. Bradley in the same mild thread, "are careful about cleanliness. Your hands are very pink from washing, and yet a faint thread from your blue cuff clung to the towel under the silver. Also, The telephone table tasted of almond paste earlier, which is not what telephones are meant to taste of. A woman in a hurry often takes comfort where she can, especially if she has just arranged something she wishes to be discovered. Mrs. Bradley coloured prettily, and then arranged composure upon her face, as one puts out china. "Miss Marple, I think you're unkind," she said. "Unkindness," said Miss Marple, "is saying a thing before one can prove it. Let us, therefore, not say anything at all." Miss Marple folded another napkin, a small ceremony that allowed the room to breathe. "Not say anything," she repeated, "until the tea is drunk and the cups speak for themselves." The kettle clicked in the kitchen with the tidy authority of an appliance that had listened to a lifetime of confidences. Clara hovered by the hearth like a figure pressed into the margin of a book, aware she was important to the text and afraid of blotting it. Adrian praised the china, the roses, the light, anything that did not answer her. Mrs. Bradley offered gratitude in a tone that asked permission to be offended later. Miss Marple poured. "Sugar?" she asked, and slid the brown tin a respectful inch nearer the gentleman, who could not help preferring what was slightly out of reach. His fingers rested on the lid as if testing temperature, then, discovering propriety, withdrew to accept a spoon instead. Mrs. Bradley, reminded of sweetness, lifted her cup with both hands, and did not touch the tin at all. "It has been a long day," Adrian said. "Village fêtes should be bottled and sold to the over-eager as a remedy." "They are a remedy," Miss Marple agreed, "for people who fancy the world is large. Small places show how few motives there are and how often they repeat." She set down the pot in a shallow ring of heat that would later memorize any hand careless enough to move it. "Clara dear, a little more hot water. The kettle has decided to be economical." The door into the passage remained open at Miss Marple's usual angle, enough for sound, but not indiscretion. Adrian's eyes drifted to it and away. Mrs. Bradley stayed on her cup. The sugar sparkle on his cuff had migrated to the sleeve seam, where a seamstress would see it long after a policeman forgot it. The pulled thread on Mrs. Bradley's cardigan had become a tiny ladder in the blue wool. "Small things kept accounts, I wonder," Adrian said lightly. "Whether Mrs. Fenwick will stay in St. Mary Mead. It suits her." "Staying," Miss Marple said, "is often safer than leaving. People think roads lead away from trouble. They only lead toward a different sort." He smiled. "You do not approve of travel." "I approve of truthful luggage," she returned, and let the brown tin make a soft sound as her spoon touched it. The sound passed like bait across the surface of talk. Clara returned with the kettle, and also with the landlord's wife from the Crown, who stood just inside the door, as if propriety had pushed her there and told her to see for herself. "Miss Marple, I beg your pardon," the woman said, breath clipped by stares. "There's something amiss in Mrs. Fenwick's room. The trunk lock looks as if a tool's been to it, and the writing case, well, I've never seen ribbon ends like confetti in an ashpan. I thought I'd come straight." Adrian looked correctly surprised, the surprise arranged to be seen. Mrs. Bradley looked sorry for the state of the world. "How good of you," Miss Marple answered. "Would you be kind and fetch the constable from the green? Tell him there is no hurry and give him a slice of seed cake to keep his temper moist." The woman, reassured by the calm she had hoped to find and would now report, withdrew with relief. The passage door breathed back into its old angle. "You see?" Miss Marple said pleasantly. "When one expects a thing to be in a certain place and it is not, one goes elsewhere like water seeking a crack. A dull observation and heartlessly useful." Adrian arranged ease along his jacket. "If Mrs. Fenwick's belongings have been disturbed, she must permit an inventory." "It would be prudent." Clara clasped her hands. "I have nothing to hide." "No," Miss Marple said, kind without softness. "But others suppose you do, and supposition breeds industry." A puff of wind nosed the curtain and lifted the cushion on the hamper the width of a coin. Mrs. Bradley's gaze, purely accidental, slid there and back. Adrian watched her watch, and then looked determinedly at the seed cake as if it might confess a secret if treated kindly. Miss Marple rose, small and exact, and adjusted the cushion so it hid the wicker thoroughly. "I am absurd about draughts," she said. She poured a little more for each, not asking, and in pouring steadied Mrs. Bradley's saucer with a finger that acquired a sugar grain. "The most trying thing," she went on as if confessing an old lady peccadillo, "is that I remember trifles. I recall that the embroidery cloth with the unfortunate stain was not in the hamper when Mrs. Clement folded it away. I recall that the cup lay on a towel with a damp ring and 2 blue fibres that did not belong to silver." Mrs. Bradley's cup trembled and set 2 rings upon the saucer. Adrian put his down altogether and pressed both palms upon his knees, a man ready to rise and not rising. "If you recall so much," he said, and the agreeable tone had frayed, "perhaps you have recalled too far. Might it not be kinder to forget?" "It would," Miss Marple said, "but kindness is not always safe. Forgetting allows people to do again what frightened them the first time. And then one finds pig's blood at a fete, and a silver cup travelling awkwardly between a cupboard and an aspidistra." She looked at her knitting basket, which had nothing to do with the conversation, and therefore discouraged argument. "Besides, I have not accused anyone. I make tea. Tea draws conclusions without speech." The latch of the front gate sounded, followed by the careful tread of someone who wished to be heard long enough to be recognized, and not so long as to be thought clumsy. "That will be our constable," Miss Marple said, and did not move. The careful tread passed. Whoever it was paused by the parlour window and stood in a patch of late sun, perhaps reading the roses' tags. Adrian exhaled. Mrs. Bradley did not. "Dear me," Miss Marple murmured, "I do hope the dog did not follow him. Dogs are so unreliable about secrets." The small decisive occurrence she had been waiting for came without drama. The cushion slipped again with the same coin-width surrender. Mrs. Bradley's hand went out, as any orderly woman's would, to put the room to rights. Adrian's hand went also, with perfect gallantry, to spare her the trouble. In the narrow reach they collided, drew back and hesitated. It is extraordinary how much of the truth lives in a hesitation. In his was ownership, in hers urgency. Hers landed first. The cushion settled too carefully. "Thank you," Miss Marple said. "How comforting it is when 2 people want the same neatness." The scrape of a shoe at the window lightly scratched the silence. Adrian stood. So did Mrs. Bradley, because he had. "We have intruded on your rest," he said smoothly. "I shall take my leave." "And I," said Mrs. Bradley, "must return to the vicarage. There is clearing." Clara remained quite still, a woman practicing being a piece of furniture. "At least," Miss Marple said sweetly, "allow me to send you with a comfort. Mr. Lowther, a little parcel of parish notices for Lady Bantry. I have tied them with blue ribbon so she will not throw them away by mistake. Mrs. Bradley, a slice of seed cake. You looked faint. Pray put it in your cardigan pocket. Hands are for handshakes." She had the packet ready from a drawer where such instruments live. The ribbon was deliberate. The pocket was bait. They accepted, thanked, made their civilities, and departed together with the politeness of people who intend to walk different ways as soon as no one is looking. When the gate clicked again, Clara let out her breath. "You made them carry pieces of their own afternoon," she said. "People seldom like to give back what they think is theirs," Miss Marple replied. "It will save time later to know which resents the parcel and which eats the cake." She lifted the cushion. The hamper sat as before, honest and full of honesty. The brown tin on the table was honest too. She opened it, drew out the sugared packet and replaced it with a folded bundle of blank paper. Weight for weight. "We shall keep the real letters," she said, moving to the mantel and opening the old clock that never kept time and always kept things. "They will live behind the works. No one trusts clocks. Therefore thieves never suspect them." The careful tread returned, accompanied by the scuff of a larger boot. This time the constable stood in the doorway, cap in hand, with the landlord's wife behind him, and the vicar's dog ahead, looking proud of his social circle. "Afternoon, Miss Marple." "They told me," said Constable Pierce. "So good of you," Miss Marple said. "Do sit. The kettle considers you." She gave him the facts without embroidery: the rifled room, the message sent by a boy, the found cup, the red smear, the inconvenient neatness. She did not say what she thought. Constables, like kettles, are more useful if not hurried to boil. Pierce scratched a note, promised to speak on the green, and went. The landlord's wife squeezed Clara's hand and whispered that she would sit outside a while like a cat. Miss Marple closed the door. "Now," she said, "we shall do a housewife's boldest act. We shall wait." She put on more water and took up her knitting, in which nothing grew because the needles were busy listening. Dusk would come. People would remember, forget, act, and pretend. Somewhere a pocket would accept cake or reject it. Somewhere a blue ribbon would itch a conscience. And when night put its comfortable hand upon the village, someone would choose what they always choose when conversation fails them. They would choose to come looking. Clara, staring at the clock as if it had spoken, said slowly, "And if they come?" "We shall be at home," Miss Marple answered. "It is so much easier to understand people when they suppose you are asleep." Evening thickened companionably around the cottage. Once a bicyclist tinkled by. Once a fox coughed in the hedge and remembered his manners. At 9, the vicarage bell rang to remind no one of anything in particular. The landlord's wife tapped the window softly to say she was still there. Miss Marple trimmed the lamp, laid a second cushion on the hamper as if protecting its feelings, and pushed the clock 2 minutes fast, not to keep time, but to notice who looked at it. They did not have to wait to midnight. At 9:45, the gate gave a soft, deliberate click, the kind made by a hand that had practiced not to. The dog in the lane did not bark. He had been bribed with half a scone and a compliment. Footsteps crossed the path with the care of someone carrying a thought more fragile than glass. Miss Marple nodded to Clara and sat back so that her profile became the tidy silhouette of a woman napping after dishes. The passage door moved a finger's breadth. A breath entered that was not the cottager's. The figure went first to the table, where the brown tin sat with its sulky dignity. A hand hovered above it and withdrew. Then to the mantel, where nothing ever mattered. The hand did not know the clock mattered. Then to the hamper, where the cushion had been placed by a woman obstinate about draughts. The cushion lifted. The wicker breathed. The hinge made the smallest treacherous sigh. Miss Marple spoke into the quiet, polite as ever. "Do not trouble with the hamper," she said. "It contains only blank paper now." She rose, very small and very certain. "What interests me," she added, "is whether you came for the letters, or whether you came to see if someone else had already taken them." The intruder froze, as people do when a drawing-room voice arrives in the dark. The cushion hovered above the hamper in a careful hand that had practiced lifting other people's things. Then the figure straightened. Mrs. Bradley stood in the lamplight, her cardigan a shade darker, her face arranged for sense to follow later. "I came," she said, "because I was worried for Mrs. Fenwick. You hinted at mischief. One comes to make sure." "Anyone worried," said Miss Marple, "waits for daylight and knocks. You, my dear, have a talent for inventories at peculiar hours. Do sit." Mrs. Bradley let the cushion fall with an innocence too deliberate, and sat on the chair's edge, the posture of someone keeping a farewell ready. Clara kept beside the hearth, pale and steady. "Why touch my things?" she asked. "To see they were untouched," Mrs. Bradley returned quickly. "When cupboards prove bare, other people rummage. Pig's blood on embroidery. A cup that loses itself, a message by a boy," Miss Marple murmured. "A tidy little play. You wrote it for a village that trusts women with lists. You suppose a great deal." "I notice a little," Miss Marple said. "Blue thread on a towel, a damp ring where the cup rested twice. Almond on a telephone. And you announcing the cupboard's bareness after claiming to find the cup." Mrs. Bradley's hands folded the air and set it tidily in her lap. If I played at theatre, Mr. Lowther directed half the show. He came to our committee with offers and a purse that opens loudly. My cousin in Market Basing wrote that a Mrs. Fenwick had taken a room at the Crown, and that a London gentleman called there. I disliked it. You thought I meant to sell the letters, Clara said. I thought men might make you do something foolish and call it fairness, Mrs. Bradley answered. So I produced a commotion to shake loose what should have been placed with Lady Bantry and the constable. Untidy, yes. Mercenary, no. Pride, Miss Marple said kindly. Pride strikes the air and sometimes hits the wrong person. And Mr. Lowther. He asks helpful questions about keys, Mrs. Bradley said crisply. He never dirties his hands. He suggests that others wash theirs twice. I expected him tonight. The gate clicked again. The pause between latch and step, a man admiring his own discretion. Adrian Lowther's silhouette passed across the curtain. He did not knock. He entered. A ruck in the mat betrayed one careful stride. How fortunate, Miss Marple observed. Two visitors with the same concern. Mr. Lowther, pray do not touch anything. Mrs. Bradley has come to ensure we are safe. Adrian measured the room, then remembered manners. Forgive the hour. I saw a figure by your hedge and feared it might be unkind. Since we are gathered, said Mrs. Bradley, shall we finish the business? Why not? Miss Marple replied. We have an audience. Clara, dear, bring the brown tin and set it on the hamper. Clara obeyed obediently. Miss Marple tapped the lid with a spoon. Its small sulky ring crossed the room like bait. Adrian's eyes were indifferent by intention, attentive by nature. Mrs. Bradley's hands did not move. I know Mr. Lowther has already opened one blue ribbon packet today and found parish notices, Miss Marple said. He will try again because patience is elastic. I know Mrs. Bradley requires a different success, that she, not a stranger, should keep the parish tidy. Between you, the letters are safer where neither of you thinks to look. Which is where? Adrian asked softly. In the clock, Miss Marple said. People who mistrust clocks never open them. They only complain about the time. Clara started. Miss Marple's smile quieted her. Adrian laughed. Then we have an impasse, he said. No one has what they want. Everyone suspects the other of wanting it more. Not quite, Mrs. Bradley said, rising. We have not agreed why he wants them. Adrian spread empty hands. Curiosity, protection. Noise is vulgar. I like quiet. For whom? Miss Marple asked. For Mrs. Fenwick, or for a man whose youthful letters have grown teeth? He looked at Clara with uncalculated softness. Both, he said. There are men who would pay to see them shouted. I would rather not. The quiet you prefer is expensive, Miss Marple said. You offered money to borrow a key. You meant to buy if she would sell and to steal if she would not. That is not protection. That is investment, Mrs. Bradley cut in, impatience beginning to steam. Your friends speculate on whether those letters could bite a politician at a convenient hour, she said. Weatherby's niece had a suitor who now sits in Parliament. Adrian's stillness hardened. You know too much. I know enough to prefer Miss Marple's clock to your motor car, she returned. Miss Marple looked sorry for both. And affection, she said to Adrian. You like Clara better than you planned. Affection muddles arithmetic. He dipped his head. Perhaps. Does that win me any credit with your clock? No. Clocks are incorruptible. They only lie about time. The landlord's wife coughed outside, a sentry. Miss Marple's voice resumed in its knitting tone. Here is what will happen. At 9 tomorrow, both of you will attend the Crown's parlour. Constable Pierce will be there, and Lady Bantry and Mrs. Clement with a cake knife. The clock will come with me. The letters, unread by either of you, will be placed upon the table. We shall decide what they are and what they are not, and if I do not come, Adrian asked lightly, then I shall telephone a friend in Market Basing who can read to a newspaper without ink, Miss Marple said. But you will come. You enjoy scenes when you can choose your chair. And I? Mrs. Bradley asked, the briskness thinned by something sore. You will bring the Gossington cup and set it before Lady Bantry, Miss Marple said, "and apologize. Not for mislaying it, but for letting anxiety tempt you into foolish methods. Bring seed cake. People forgive better when their hands are busy." Mrs. Bradley's mouth trembled, then steadied. "I can apologize," she said. "I will not apologize to him." "You needn't," Miss Marple replied. "Parliament remembers longer than a fate." Clara, who had been very quiet, found her breath. "What shall I do tonight?" "Sleep," Miss Marple said, "because tomorrow you must look as if you have always been sensible. Courage resembles tidy hair." Adrian bowed politely. "Until morning, then." "Until morning," echoed Mrs. Bradley, and for the first time they left in the same direction, two different guilts briefly agreeing on the hour. The gate clicked. The cottage exhaled. Miss Marple went to the mantel, touched the old clock as one pats an elderly cat, and listened to its mild, reliable lie. She closed it, drew the curtain, and at last drank her tea cold. "There," she said to Clara and to the room and to a past mistake almost ready to be folded away, "we have given everyone back to themselves for one more night." Morning turned last night's anxieties clear. The Crown's parlour smelt of beeswax. Lady Bantry presided by the fire. Mrs. Clement held a cake knife under a napkin. Constable Pierce waited to be reasonable. Miss Marple set her knitting bag and the clock on the table. Clara kept close. Mrs. Bradley came in with the Gossington cup held solemnly in both hands. "An error of fuss," she said, placing it before Lady Bantry. "I am sorry for yesterday." "Very proper," Lady Bantry returned. "Next year we chain it to the aspidistra." Adrian Lowther arrived last, immaculate and charming. Daylight lessened his mystery. He bowed to the room as to a witness. "We'll have this tidy," Pierce said. "Miss Marple." "Only a little housekeeping." Miss Marple opened the clock, drew out a tied bundle and set it down. Mrs. Weatherby's letters. "No one here has read them entire." Mrs. Clement obligingly cut the blue ribbon with the knife she usually gave to cake. The pages did not explode. They sighed. A girl's hand, he spoke prettily and crossly by turns. An answering hand, first R, then J.W., wrote back. There were roses, scoldings, and a sentence that stopped as if written standing. One letter named Beechwood Farms Loft, the blue ladder, and the little shepherdess in silver, to be hidden until Sunday. Possibly a charm, Miss Marple said. She read, third rung from the top. The slat loose. Hide it there, and we shall carry it with the seed cake, for Aunt never looks under cake. Lady Bantry laughed. My dears, we were all fools once. How comforting when other people's folly has directions. So nothing to trouble Parliament, Adrian observed. Only the nation of girls and boys, Miss Marple said. A pressed cornflower ghosted blue. When paper shifted, it brought the faintest almond. There is nothing a newspaper would pay for, she added, and several things it would harm by printing. Mrs. Bradley let out breath. Then we may put them to bed. In a moment. Miss Marple looked at the cup. Daylight showed a new scratch below the crest and a polished smear like a thumb upon the lip. You, Mrs. Bradley, kept order, and did the wrong thing for the right reason. You, Mr. Lowther, liked tidy money and did the wrong thing for no good reason. The letters themselves are not the danger. She tapped the page about the ladder. Farmers do not waste boards. If a slat was loose then, it will still be loose or show where it was. Constable after cake, will you come with us? We shall take nothing. We shall only look. Daylight is the best sort of warrant in a village. Pierce assented, pleased. Lady Bantry proposed her motor. Adrian smiled as if the road had been his idea. Mrs. Bradley sat straight. They ate cake without hurrying truth. Adrian refused a second slice and brushed at his cuff. A new sugar grain had somehow found him. Mrs. Bradley folded her slice in a napkin for later. Mrs. Clement noticed who saved what. Beechwood was a short drive through hedges stitched with bryony. The farmer's wife received Miss Marple as one receives weather. Laughed, mind your heads. We keep last year's apples until the wasps give up. The ladder was still blue, colour faded to memory. Near the top, the third rung showed a newer shaving. Miss Marple climbed. The slat shifted with a sulky sound and came away enough to show darkness. Her fingers found nothing. Then disturbed dust not yet settled. A tiny blue bead rolled to her palm. From a scent file, Mrs. Clement said below. And here, Miss Marple murmured, touching a little round dent in the wood. Something small sat a long while and then did not. If the letters meant a shepherdess in silver, she is gone. Perhaps not far. Adrian leaned on a beam and offered skepticism. If something was taken, we know only that someone reads. We know when, Miss Marple returned. Dust takes time to settle. This was stirred within a day or two. Mrs. Bradley kept her eyes on the ladder's base. Then someone read them before all this. Someone who already knew the place, Miss Marple said, descending. They did not want a stranger's rummaging to find it. Pierce looked happier on soil than on polish. What next, miss? We finished the story. Where would a girl hide a trinket so her aunt would not see? Not in a drawer or trunk, but on the high lip inside a trophy cup when it is turned for polishing. 3 faces turned toward the Gossington cup. Lady Bantry put a gloved finger to her pearls. We polished it last week. Then anything loose fell, Miss Marple said, unless wedged with wax. Warm brick and polish would soften that. Say yesterday when it sat by the vicarage window and someone rubbed a thumb away. They returned with more speed than dignity. In the parlour, Mrs. Clement laid a towel like a nurse. Miss Marple turned the cup mouth down and tapped the base with the cake knife hilt. Nothing fell. She warmed the silver with her palms. A faint almond rose, not bitter, more pastry than poison, the scent of marzipan on fingers that later met polish. Allow me, said Adrian, useful. I carry a penknife. Don't gouge it, Lady Bantry protested. It has my name. Miss Marple used the smallest blade to ease the interior lip. Something yielded with gummy reluctance. A brittle line of wax showed itself, and a dark sliver peeped like a postage stamp. Pierce breathed. Miss Marple coaxed it out with the crochet hook she kept among needles. A tarnished locket lay in her palm, its shepherdess worn to a whisper. A companion, she said. What the letters called a shepherdess was a locket. The hinge resisted, then consented. Inside was a curl of fair faded hair, and a wafer of paper marked with 2 cramped initials. A.L. The room changed its silence. Adrian did not move. Mrs. Bradley did, a careful inch. Clara's breath caught for the past. Lady Bantry said, well, and then stopped. A.L., Adrian said lightly. Common letters. So common, Miss Marple said, that half the parish owns them. But with a blue ladder and that farm, they point not to you, Mr. Lowther, but to Arthur Liley, who once helped at Beechwood and grew into Tommy's father. He courted, carelessly, Miss Eliza Weatherby before she married elsewhere. She hid a memory, not a lever for Parliament. A woman would keep such a thing and hide it, because forgetting is work. Mrs. Clement nodded as if a sermon had ended correctly. Pierce looked relieved and faintly thwarted. Adrian's relief had an edge of insult. Money prefers to be cleverer than hair in a locket. But Miss Marple said, someone disturbed the rung this week, thumbed the cup, and borrowed red drama at the fete. Our trouble is not the past. It is present and still at work. She closed the locket and set it beside the letters. Now we must ask who needed a distraction so badly that they copied youth to make it, and what they hoped we would not look at while we polished old silver. Miss Marple let the question hang among the teacups. Who needed the noise so quiet hands could work? The letters and small locket lay together. While we admired our younger selves, she said, someone hoped an older habit would pass unseen. The parish keeps 2 cupboards, she said. One for bunting and prizes, one for money till Monday. Yesterday both were opened. One gave back a cup, the other may not have given back all it should. Constable Pierce coloured. Vicarage morning room. Green cash tin for the fete takings. We don't count with people underfoot, Mrs. Clement said. I locked it and set the key in the tray by the telephone. I went back twice. There were hands. There was almond on that tray, Miss Marple said. Hands went there. Lady Bantry rose. Let us be vulgar and count. They went to the vicarage. Tin's key showed a burr where steel had been hurried. Coins lay properly. Notes sat under elastic. On the paper, a fine blue fibre clung. At one corner, a faint drift of sugar. Miss Hartnell arrived with her ledger. Takings should be £78 4 and 6. The envelope yielded 33. 2 hands, Miss Marple said. One that sheds blue and replaces tidily. One that trails sweetness where it shouldn't. Mrs. Bradley's colour rose and steadied. I borrowed, she said. £20. I meant to replace it Monday. My brother's arrears would have put his tools to auction. I used the telephone. I sent the boy. I laid the stained embroidery. I put the cup where it would be found. I would have owned it privately. And the rest? Pierce asked. Not my hands, she said, folding her fingers. Adrian produced indignation. To suspect a guest... Guests are useful, Miss Marple said. You could not steal letters in a crowd, so you tried to buy them. When that failed, you did an easier thing. While the tent performed alarm and the room performed fainting, you performed substitution, taking notes and leaving talk. Parish notices tied in blue in a glass canister. And because you dislike dust, you shook your sleeve over sweetness. Prove it, he said. I let people prove things for me, Miss Marple replied. You will have changed some notes already. A man of your sort uses the post office, not the bank. You also fold notes twice lengthwise. Gentlemen's wallets teach that. If we ask now at the Crown for the change you paid, the landlady will remember the fold. If we go to the post office, Miss Evans will recall 2 postal orders bought this morning with clean pounds folded twice. He laughed. It wavered. Absurd. Only domestic, Miss Marple said. Domestic things endure longer than cleverness. She looked at Pierce. Shall we? They went by brisk stages to the Crown, where the landlady recalled exactly folded notes, to the post office, where Miss Evans confirmed 2 early postal orders paid with clean pounds folded twice. Adrian applauded memory while his smile whitened. Back at the vicarage, Miss Hartnell had discovered 3 raffle stubs neatly missing, as if winners might be invented later. She glared at Mrs. Bradley, who shook her head. I have sins enough, that gesture said. I will not adopt more. Someone, Miss Marple said, wanted many small doors open at once. When green tin and ledgers argue, a larger wrong may pass between them without paying. What larger wrong? Pierce asked. The kind one telephones about from the vestibule, Miss Marple said. A call to market basing, where a gentleman waited to know whether letters existed that could be made a threat. When told they did not, he advised his friend to settle for cash and, failing that, to leave quickly. Adrian missed his moment to object. Or perhaps, she added, the gentleman in market basing is yourself by another name, an account that receives tidiness and returns it washed. He shrugged. I cannot help it if people are generous. Generosity, Miss Marple said, returns more than it takes. Mrs. Bradley rose. I will repay what I took before noon with interest. I am ashamed, but I did not send anyone to steal for me. She looked at Adrian as a sensible woman looks at a wasp. Do, said Miss Marple. It is the quickest path across a bog. Clara, who had been quiet, said, There is still the locket. It goes back to the Weatherby family, Miss Marple said, with a note that says time keeps some things and not others. And Tommy Liley may see it. Boys should be proud of fathers for being foolish in the proper way, not clever in the wrong one. Adrian made his last play. Mrs. Fenwick, I was trying clumsily to keep you from harm. You have kept me from a number of things, Clara said. Harm may be among them. Am I under arrest? He asked. Pierce looked at Miss Marple, who looked at the sugar speck, the folded note, and a village's appetite for quiet. Not today, she said. Today you will write 2 letters, one to return the postal orders. Miss Evans prefers correctness, and one to a man in market basing, telling him he will not hear from you again. Then you will take afternoon train and practice being bored in London. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you will wake where no one knows how you fold your money. That is mercy. Spend it by not spending at all, he bowed and left. Pierce followed to be sure there was a train. When the door shut, air took back its size. Mrs. Bradley spoke. "Miss Marple, I am obliged. Fear makes plain people fancy they can arrange the world and not pay." "I will pay, we all do," Miss Marple said. She closed the clock and laid a hand upon it. "Now truth may knock like any visitor." "It has one more errand." "What errand?" Lady Bantry asked. "The embroidery," Miss Marple said. It was not only drama. It pointed. The smear lay at the shepherdess's hem, exact, not random. Whoever made it wished us to think of the locket and the cup, not of the cupboard. The person who placed the cloth in my hamper had to be near the tea tent and to know which hamper would be mine. That is committee knowledge. Mrs. Bradley closed her eyes and opened them. "I put it there. I thought a lady with clean cupboards safest. I am sorry." "Say it once more at the meeting," Miss Marple said, kindness firm. "Then keep books so neat that no one remembers this year except as the one the roses were good." Clara touched the letters. "And me?" "You will post these to Mrs. Weatherby's niece," Miss Marple said. "Then take the 410 to Much Haddam, and write to me from a place with no lanyards and no charming men for a fortnight." Clara smiled. "Yes." Miss Marple sat and let the village resume its size with room for mischief and mending. "Well," she told the roses, "that is most of it. The last piece will show itself when we stop admiring silver and look at what someone hoped to hide while we polished the past." The afternoon obliged itself back into ordinary business, but the ordinary had seams. Miss Marple, who disliked leaving threads untucked, asked the Fate Committee to meet at the vicarage to settle figures. Mrs. Bradley came with the Gossington cup restored and a stiff envelope. Lady Bantry brought forgiveness. Mrs. Clement the ledger. Mr. Petherick his pen. Constable Pierce listened. "Let us finish with arithmetic," said the vicar. Miss Hartnell recited totals. £78 4 and 6, less expenses properly authorized, plus raffle receipts. The green tin yielded its honesty. Mrs. Bradley's 20 with apology. 2 postal orders returned by Miss Evans. Coins rehearsing consent. Short by £5, she concluded. 5 is a comforting number, Miss Marple observed. It sounds deliberate without being greedy. She set a small brown envelope on the table. "I found this behind the hymnals. It holds £5 folded twice lengthwise. One might think of gentlemen's wallets, but one should also think of habits. Habits travel even when people try to walk differently." Mr. Petherick's pen twitched. "Are we to turn every fold into a sermon?" "Not every fold," Miss Marple said mildly. "Only the ones that teach. Yesterday 3 raffle stubs were neatly missing. Missing stubs are useful. One may pretend they belong to prizes not yet claimed, and redeem them later to square accounts. A tin short by 5 invites a gentleman to rescue the figures for a small handling, industry rather than wickedness." She looked at Mr. Petherick without looking. "But yesterday there were too many rescues at once." Mrs. Bradley set down her envelope as if it smouldered. "If you mean to accuse me again, I am finished accusing you," Miss Marple said gently. "You have told the truth twice. It grows easier. The truth remaining is smaller and older. Mr. Petherick, when you placed this 5 behind the hymnals, after Miss Evans returned what should not have been taken, did you mean to restore it before Monday and forget the scuffle? One can always claim the hymnals did not balance." His shoulder lifted and fell. "The fate never balances," he muttered. "There is always something to be smoothed. Yesterday I saw a chance to make the columns neat again, and keep a consideration for the hours I spend keeping them that way." He straightened. "Call it petty. I call it common," said Miss Marple. "Put the 5 into the tin while people can see it." He did, flushing. Constable Pierce asked, "Anything to be done in law, miss?" "In law, plenty. In wisdom, less. Mr. Petherick will resign the handling of parish money after he balances this year's accounts in public and without flourishes. He will also write to 3 families whose raffle tickets he lost, and enclose little comforts from his own pocket." Mr. Petherick's lips thinned, then relaxed into the grimace respectable people wear when told to be better at cost. "Very well. Then we may close the books," Miss Marple said. Mrs. Bradley, your brother will receive 20 from you, and not from St. Mary Mead. Mr. Lowther is on the 4:10 to London, where boredom will do him good. The letters will go to their drawer. The locket will sit in a new box with old hair, and next year we shall chain the cup." Lady Bantry patted the locket. "A happy ending." "Happy enough," Miss Marple said. "But endings teach. There remains only why Mrs. Bradley pressed almond against silver." She turned with grandmotherly mildness. "You went to Beechwood earlier this week. The loft still carries your scent. You found the rung loose, and the page that mentioned a shepherdess in silver. You guessed, and tried marzipan on the cup to ease wax. When it would not yield and fear grew, you staged a commotion to be alone with it. It was the wrong kindness." Mrs. Bradley's eyes filled and steadied. "I am ashamed." "Then we are finished," said Miss Marple, and the room clattered itself into farewell. Clara remained while the vicar went to arrange virtue with the constable. Lady Bantry discussed wreaths, Mrs. Clement counted forks, and Mr. Petherick stared at his pen. Miss Marple touched Clara's sleeve. "We shall post these now," she said, lifting the letters, "and afterwards take tea as if nothing important had ever happened to anybody." They walked to the post office. Miss Evans weighed the packet and licked stamps. On the green, Tommy Liley endured a scolding about jam with good humour. Boys grow generous on such stories. At the Crown, the landlord's wife reported, "He took the train," looked as if London owed him a better afternoon, and handed Clara a small parcel. "A proper lock for your trunk." Clara laughed and nearly cried. "Thank you." They went to the cottage where the kettle had anticipated them. "We are at the aftermath," Clara said, then blushed. "We are at the washing up," Miss Marple corrected, smiling. "Aftermaths happen while cups dry." They drank with the window open to the hedge. Clara rested her hand on the clock that had guarded secrets. "You were very gentle," she said. "With them?" "With me. One must be," Miss Marple answered. "People fall into wrongdoing the way knitting falls off a needle. Pick it up at once and no one sees the hole. Leave it and later you have only a draught and a great deal of mending." A soft tap. Tommy's mother stood there. The boy nudged in front, holding a white paper bag. "We brought cake," she announced, "for saying no to a penny. And, Tommy's dad says, tell Miss the initials in the locket mustn't be talked of because some men blush slower than others." She winked and fled. Miss Marple opened the bag. Inside lay 2 slices of sponge and, tucked under them, a raffle stub and a penciled note. "I took this off Mr. Petherick yesterday when he looked in his coat for a pen. Should I give it back?" The boy's hand had tried to make its letters behave and succeeded half the time. Miss Marple folded the note and put the stub into her pocket as if it were an ordinary receipt. "No," she said, answering a child who was not in the room. "You have already given everything back." They ate the cake. When twilight reached the roses, Clara stood. "I will go to Much Haddam tomorrow," she said. "I should like to be somewhere I can be boring." "It is a safe occupation," Miss Marple said. "Write to me about it. People who are bored notice things. Noticing keeps one from foolishness." Clara bent and kissed her cheek. "Goodbye for now." "Goodbye, dear. When in doubt, make tea." When the gate clicked, Miss Marple sat very still, the way one sits to learn whether a house is pleased. It was. She rose, straightened the cushion on the ottoman, and because no one was looking, tasted the smallest corner of seed cake, and laughed at herself for greed. Outside, the village lowered its voice to evening. The roses approved, nodding in the dusk. Inside, the old clock tidied the minutes. The day put itself away. Tomorrow would take it out again and wear it without noticing it had been mender. Morning made a habit of pretending nothing had happened. The village obliged it, as villages do, by discussing weather as if the day before had been kind. Miss Marple, who approved of kindness but not of forgetting, walked to the pillar box with Clara's packet, already swallowed by the post, and the small locket in a tissue-lined envelope for Mrs. Weatherby's niece. The roses along the path were recovered. Bees who prefer the present worked industriously at it. The committee signed off figures that finally learned their places. Mr. Petherick, paler than accounts, read a short apology that did not conceal its length, then placed £5 on the table, and with a stiff little bow to the future, surrendered the key to the fate tin. Mrs. Bradley's brother kept his tools. She kept her job and a tempered briskness. Adrian Lowther sent a note from London containing a train time, an address one suspects of renting itself to the less industrious, and 2 postal receipts. The vicar pinned the receipts beside the Harvest Fate photograph in the porch, which is as near as churches come to saying we remember without saying we condemn. Clara, with a suitcase that now clicked at the right places, stood with Miss Marple at the gate. "You have been very good to me," she said. "I should like to be good to myself for once, and that seems to require boredom." "Boredom," Miss Marple told her, "is simply the space into which good sense walks." They embraced. Clara went to Much Haddam, where letters would be dull and reputable and tea exactly as many minutes as the clock allowed. The last errand took Miss Marple to Beechwood Farm, with Constable Pierce walking as a man walks who hopes a thing may be done without him. Arthur Liley met them in the yard with Tommy tugging at the end of his sleeve. He had a workman's tan and a boy's shyness under it. "We heard," he began, then stalled. Miss Marple held out the envelope. "For the family," she said. "Kept too long, but not wickedly. There is hair in it. You will know whose." He opened it awkwardly and did not quite look at what he saw. A colour that was not sun rose under his skin. "Well," he said, and then again gentler. "Well, it seems," Miss Marple added, "that years ago your initials and a blue ladder were part of a small drama. No one needs to rehearse it now. But boys should be allowed fine ancestry when it's merely foolish and not wicked." Tommy, who had not followed most of this, understood fine and father, and puffed with them. "I told Miss about the penny," he confided, "because children cannot keep heroics." "Did right," his father said, and squeezed his shoulder. The squeeze had the finality of a door quietly shut on a draught. The Weatherby niece, in a letter written on paper that had practiced being expensive, thanked Miss Marple and returned the thanks again the next day, which is the wealthier way of paying twice. She would keep the letters but not the secret. She wrote that a girl's mistakes should be owned by the girl when she had grown sensible, and that she had. She sent a hamper of jam that Mrs. Price grudgingly admitted was nearly ours, which was high praise. If the village felt improved, it hid the feeling. It is bad form to look as though one has learned something. Miss Marple, taking her tea at the little table by the window, thought of the steps from a red smear to an almond scent, from a blue thread to a damp ring, from a cuff sparkle to folded notes. The steps had been small domesticated things. Crimes, she reflected, fancy themselves grand. But they must tiptoe across the same kitchen tiles as everyone else, and that is where they print their feet. She did not boast of it. It was enough to see Mrs. Bradley measuring sugar with a steadier hand, and to watch Mr. Petherick count in the presence of other people's eyes. It was enough that Adrian Lowther had been invited by Boredom to a new occupation, and that, if he declined, Boredom would continue without him. It was enough that the cup shone under a strip of chain in Lady Bantry's pantry, domestic and therefore safe. That evening Mrs. Clement brought the photograph of the fete to show Miss Marple where she appeared in it, behind the tea roses, looking as if she had planted them. The vicar, peering, declared he looked like a man thinking of a sermon, and not of a missing cup, which was perfectly true and therefore uninteresting. "We shall do better next year," Mrs. Clement said. "We shall be tedious." "It is the highest form of morality," Miss Marple agreed. When they had gone, the cottage resumed its careful quiet. Miss Marple opened the clock and took out nothing, which is often the best thing to take out of a clock. She set its hands to the correct wrong time, and listened while it lied for her comfort. On the mantel the small crochet hook gleamed with modest pride. On the table the brown sugar tin sat innocent and sullen, as only tins can. There remained the matter that had troubled her faintly, the embroidery cloth. She folded it, and because kindness must be efficient, sent it to the sewing circle with a note suggesting the stain be appliqued with a new border, blue perhaps, and gifted to the schoolmaster's reading corner. Shepherdesses deserve rehabilitation. Mr. Nash, who had learned to value the village's own curriculum, wrote a thank you with spelling the children would correct. A week later, a letter arrived from Much Haddam in Clara's cautious, hopeful hand. She had slept, it said, and read and walked. She had refused an invitation from a man with a hat that believed itself handsome, and had felt the relief of it like clean air after a draught of something too sweet. I think, Clara wrote, that respectability is not the roof I thought it, but it is a good floor. Miss Marple smiled at that, and put the letter in the clock for a day when foolishness might ask to be contradicted. On Sunday, the vicar preached a sermon that mentioned cupboards. Though not the vicarage's, and the hymn Lead Us, Heavenly Father had never sounded so practical. Mrs. Bradley sang it with her chin up, as if work had been chosen. Mr. Petherick's voice was thin but present. Tommy joined in 3 words late every line, and ended them loudly, because boys are prophets of aftermaths. Afterwards there was seed cake on the lawn, and a cue that behaved. Lady Bantry, admiring the chained cup, sighed that life was duller when silver refused to go missing. Not duller, Miss Marple said, merely better at staying where it ought. She glanced over the green, where ordinary wickedness, small, repairable, domestic, kept its appointment with ordinary goodness, which is to say it kept being seen. When the shadows lengthened, Miss Marple returned to her cottage. She laid her hat upon its old companion nail and went round the room with the almost imperceptible attentions that make rooms faithful. A cushion exacted, a curtain square, a teaspoon returned to its own tribe. The evening entered agreeably. Somewhere a rook scolded the weather into taking itself seriously. The roses, finishing their day, bowed as if from a stage. She poured her tea and allowed herself a generous slice of seed cake, because prudence is not the same as stinginess. The first sip was unremarkable in the way that earns a second. She thought of Clara, of the boy who had refused a penny on principle and earned cake instead, of a woman whose briskness had run her into a wall and learned to walk around it, of a man who would forget St. Mary Mead in order to be forgotten by it. She thought, as she always did at the end of a muddle, that most difficulties arise when people hurry past their own reflections. It was at this point that the clock, with an air of modest triumph, chimed the wrong hour. Miss Marple tilted her head and smiled into the room. "Yes," she said aloud, as if answering the house. "I dare say we have kept fairly good time between us." The house, content with the compliment, settled. There would be other fetes, other cups, other letters written foolishly and read too late. But there would also be cake set aside for fainting, boys who asked for their penny first, and sensible women rooting embroidery out of hampers and turning it into something that warms a knee. The world, Miss Marple had learned, is not improved by drama so much as by tidy noticing. She glanced at the sugar tin, at the harmless glint on its rim, and found herself absurdly fond of it. Outside, the lane gave its polite good nights. Miss Marple cut another sliver of cake, for the dog, she said to no one, though the dog would never see it, and returned to her chair. She took up her knitting and did not progress it, which is a sort of progress. Presently she smiled, at the village, at human nature, at the dear incurable habit people have of making small mistakes in public and being forgiven for them in private. The case, such as it was, had been less a crime than a collection of human economies and vanities. It had all the same needed seeing to. She sipped and watched the light press itself thinner on the wall. When it was quite gone and the first sensible star had appeared, Miss Marple put down her cup and folded her work away. It is best after a day made right to add no more to it. She turned the lamp lower, listened once for the village breathing as one listens for a child asleep, and smiled again, not at triumph, but at the quiet sound of things in their places. Then, being properly satisfied, she put out the light.